Yeah, I'm just gonna... Okay, good morning, everybody. Where money is concerned, I have two types of friends. Some of them haven't the slightest clue about finance. They save without investing, and they don't understand that any idle money, any inactive money, is lost money. Think of it like a muscle. If you put it to work, it grows. But if you don't, it shrinks. Why? Because of inflation. Do you remember what you could buy with 100 euros 10 years ago? Well, you can't buy nearly as much today with 100 euros. And the same happens to your money sitting in your bank account. It shrinks. Then there's the other type of friend, the financially savvy one, the one who understands the ins and outs of the stock market, the one who has an opinion on Bitcoin, and the one who tries to predict the next financial crisis. And the last time I spoke to one of my financially savvy friends, he extolled the virtues of investing in metal, namely silver. To me, it sounded a bit old-fashioned and conservative, but it turns out that I was grossly misinformed. So that has led me to research silver and gold, and today I'm going to speak about the value of gold. Investors can invest in gold through exchange-traded funds, commonly known as ETFs, or they can buy stock in gold miners or associated companies, or they can buy the physical product, actual gold. There are plenty of reasons and methods for those investments in gold. So let's look at history for a minute. In order to fully understand the purpose of gold, one must look back to the start of the gold market. While gold's history began in 2000 BC, when the ancient Egyptians started forming jewelry, it wasn't until 560 BC that gold started to act as a currency. At that time, merchants wanted to create a standardized and easily transferable form of money that would simplify trade. And the creation of a gold coin stamped with a seal seemed to be the answer, because gold jewelry was already widely accepted and recognized globally. So gold was the way to go. Following the advent of gold as money, its importance continued to grow and grow throughout Europe and the UK. The British pound, which symbolizes a pound of sterling silver, of pure silver, the shillings and pence, all of those were based on the amount of gold or silver that they represented. And eventually, over time, gold symbolized wealth throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Let's look at the US Bimetallic Standard. The US government continued on with this gold tradition by establishing a bimetallic standard in 1792. The bimetallic standard simply stated that every monetary unit in the US had to be backed by either gold or silver. For example, $1 US was the equivalent of 24.75 grains of gold. In other words, the coins that were used as money simply represented the gold or the silver that was presently deposited at the bank. But this gold standard did not last forever. During the 1900s, there were several key events that eventually led to the transition of gold out of the monetary system. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created and started issuing promissory notes, so the present-day version of our paper money, and those could be redeemed in gold on demand, so exchanged for gold on demand. And the early 20th century is when fiat money started to dominate global economics. So instead of attributing value to actual gold, we started speculating. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934, so a law that was passed in the US, gave the government title to all the gold coins in circulation, and that put an end to the minting of any new gold coins. So the US government took complete hold of the gold, and no more gold coins were made. In short, this act to the idea that gold or gold coins were no longer necessary in serving as money. And in 1971, so 50 years ago, the US abandoned the gold standard, and the currency, the US dollar, ceased to be backed by gold. It was just the US dollar in and of itself. So what's the role of gold in our modern economy? No one has gold bars under their mattress, right? So even though gold no longer backs the US dollar or other worldwide currencies, it doesn't back any currency today, it still carries importance in our global economy. To validate this point, look no further than the balance sheet of central banks and other financial organizations, for example, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Currently, these organizations, central banks and the IMF, they're responsible for holding almost 1/5 of the world's supply of gold, of above ground gold, so extracted gold. In addition, several central banks have added to their present gold reserves. They've added some gold because they're concerned about the long-term global economy. Another argument in favor of gold is that it preserves wealth. The reason for gold's importance in the modern economy centers on the fact that it has successfully preserved wealth throughout thousands of generations. The same, however, cannot be said about paper-denominated currencies, paper money. To put things into perspective, let's look at an example. In the early 1970s, 1 ounce of gold equaled $35. Let's say that at that time, you had a choice of either holding an ounce of gold or simply keeping the $35. They would both buy you the same things. They would buy you a brand new business suit or a fancy bicycle. However, if you had an ounce of gold today and converted it for today's prices, it would still be enough to buy a brand new suit, but the same cannot be said about the $35. Your $35 don't have the same value. In short, you would have lost a substantial amount of your wealth if you decided to hold on to the $35 as opposed to the 1 ounce of gold, because the value of gold has increased while the value of the dollar has been decreased by inflation. It has eroded. Here comes the good financial stuff. So gold is a good hedge against the dollar. It's a good protection. The idea that gold preserves wealth is even more important in an economic environment where investors are faced with a declining US dollar and rising inflation. Historically, gold has served as a hedge against both of these scenarios, the decline of the dollar and rising inflation. With rising inflation, gold typically appreciates. And when investors realize that their money is losing value, they start positioning their investments in a hard asset, gold, for example. And usually hard assets have traditionally maintained their value. Gold is a prime example. It's never lost its value. The reason that gold benefits from a declining US dollar is because gold is priced in US dollars globally. And there are 2 reasons for this relationship. First, investors who are looking at buying gold, so central banks mostly, have to sell their US dollars to make that transaction. They have to buy gold with US dollars. And this ultimately drives the US dollar lower because global investors seek to diversify out of the dollar. The second reason has to do with the fact that a weakening dollar makes gold cheaper for investors who have other currencies. So investors who have Chinese money or euros or pounds. This results in a greater demand from investors who hold currencies that have appreciated relative to the US dollar. Some of those currencies include the British pound, for example. It's appreciated. It's getting stronger and stronger. I'll stop here and I'll do my second half later.